All right, so the next section, starting from chapter 9, verse 8, I think through verse 17 here, is further instructions. So we just saw the instructions concerning dietary changes and the command for capital punishment and the honor and respect for lifeblood. So now we're going to see the next phase here. So then God spoke to Noah and to his sons with him, saying, "And as for me, behold, I establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the cattle, and every beast of the earth with you, and all that go out of the ark, every beast of the earth. Thus I establish my covenant with you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood. Never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth." And God said, "This is the sign of the covenant which I make between me and you, and every living creature that is with you, for perpetual generations. I set my rainbow in the cloud, and it shall be for the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. It shall be when I bring a cloud over the earth that the rainbow shall be seen in the cloud. And I will remember my covenant which is between me and you, and every living creature of all flesh. The waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. The rainbow shall be in the cloud, and God says, will look on it to remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth." And God said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant which I have established between me and all flesh, that is, on the earth." So this is the covenant section. So we just looked at the changes post-flood. Now we're looking at God's promise never again to flood the earth. There's some important points here as to why this covenant is important. And as we talked about a few weeks ago, maybe, or 1 or 2 weeks ago, you know, the actual Noahic covenant, the covenant God made with Noah, was to save his life if he built an ark and obediently followed God's instructions. This covenant is really with all flesh and all descendants of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, not really so much with Noah. But this is the one when most scholars talk about the Noahic covenant, they're talking about this one, right? But I think the real Noahic covenant is the one that's preceded the flood. This is the all living flesh, never to flood the earth again covenant that God made and communicated to Noah. So let's talk about some of these. So as I said, the first covenant God made with Noah was really only for him and really, by extension, his immediate family in order to survive the flood. This covenant, the following covenant, was made with Noah, but really with all of his descendants that would come after him and really all humanity. Okay. So God made his covenant with every living creature of all kinds that Noah was called to preserve by bringing them onto the ark. So God specifically promised that he will never again cut off all flesh by the floodwaters that cover the whole earth. And note that he did not promise that he would never again judge the world for sin, but he said that he would never again flood the whole earth. That's an important distinction. So God's not breaking his commandment or his covenant when he tells Peter that he's going to judge the world again by fire. He's very specific. He's very clear. I will never again judge all flesh and bring floodwaters to destroy all living things on the earth by water, by flood. Okay, so he's being very specific. So Peter is drawing on that and recognizing that this is not a promise never to judge. It's a promise that the flood will never again be used as the mechanism to bring judgment on the earth. So I believe this covenant provides humanity with hope that they can live on earth without fear of heavy rain or even a local flood, as though it's going to then result in the same thing that happened in Noah's day. Okay, and so we can see. So I think if we properly assimilate all the information that we've looked at in Genesis thus far, right, that there was a mist that went up from the ground to water the whole face of the earth, and there was no rain up until that time. It says at one point. At that same point. And so, maybe the whole world, including Noah and his sons and all that, they had really never seen a storm cloud. They'd never really seen torrential rains or anything like that. and they certainly never seen the land that they lived on suddenly flooded by raging waters. Okay, and so I think this promise is, because this flood was such a significant event, and as we talked about last week anyway, there was just hundreds of flood legends all around the world, right? Over 300 just in North and South America, with original tribes that have been here for 100 or several hundred years, or more than 1,000 years. There's flood legends all over the place. Okay, this is to remind us that God says, "I will never again destroy the earth." So when we see a big dark cumulus cloud with thunder and lightning and rain and all that coming over, that doesn't mean, well, I'm safe. God said He's never going to flood the world again. But it's, because people can die in a local flood, and storms and all of that. But this is, we should never say, well, God's judging just like He did last time, right? Because I think the whole world was different. They'd never seen this kind of, hydrologic cycle or whatever else that was going on there. And so now they don't have to, God is judging, God is judging. Doesn't have to be like that. God promised He would never again flood the earth. And so while you should take shelter and protection, and people may die in a local flood, this is a promise that God won't ever destroy again by flood. Liz?
I think the thing that was so profound for me, and I think for Kirk when we went out to Kentucky and we were going through the whole thing, I never really thought particularly what happened to all the people.
Yeah. Yeah. They have some. Yeah, we kind of focus on the positive side of the story. So God calls Noah and commands him to build an ark, and his whole family was saved. And they made it for a year on the ark, and they came off the ark, and the world restarted. But yeah, the ark encounter has some interesting dioramas of people literally perishing in the raging floodwaters and destruction. So yeah, it's a significant event. Again, we don't know if it's tens of thousands or hundreds of millions or whatever, but it was a catastrophic and intense judgment, which I think is why God is, I think we can conclude that God has emotions. And I think this event, even though God knew all along that He would do it, and God doesn't experience time and He doesn't learn and all of that, He still has emotions. And to see that many people all in one fell swoop of floodwaters perish in the flood, I think God was dramatically impacted on it, which impacts, in a sense, His long suffering as we look at our world today and think, why is God so delayed in bringing judgment? Isn't the world overripe, which is exactly what Revelation talks about, the overripe grapes that God will come and tread in the winepress of His wrath. Right? They're overripe. They're over ready for judgment, but it's part of God's long suffering. But yeah, I think we can focus on how the world was impacted outside the ark as much as we can think about the life of the 8 people inside the ark when we hear these stories. But I think the main point of God making this promise is that He wants people not to be terrified of natural weather phenomenon and conditions and things like that. Okay, so in order to do that, God gave a perpetual sign that His covenant would last for all generations. This rainbow. Okay, so again, we can probably presume that Noah never saw a rainbow until after the floodwaters, right? God says, I'm going to give you a sign. And I don't think it's much of a sign if you go, well, I can explain it because water drops and the prism effect and through the sun and blah, blah, blah. I think God created the environment for that to occur because it's now a sign. And so, while I don't see a rainbow in every storm cloud, the potential is there. And but it's really, while it is a sign for man, God really says, I'm going to look at the rainbow and I'm going to remember that I'm not going to destroy the earth again, right? And so I think there's some interesting things there. So rainbow is associated with a natural hydrologic cycle, and so it's part of that. And again, that gives me more sort of my own, while not all creation scientists and whatnot agree, I think it gives me more sort of ammunition to think that there probably wasn't a lot of any rain on the earth prior to the global flood, because the rainbow is part of that hydrologic process, with rain, and if the rainbow was not there, then probably rain wasn't there as much, or maybe at all. So for all generations, I believe, this is something we're probably missing an opportunity on, or maybe some of you do and others aren't, but children should be taught about the significance of the sign of the rainbow. It was God gave it to us after Noah's flood, and it's the continued fulfillment of his promises that even though we are sinners and certainly deserve God's judgment, that he promises he will never again destroy the earth by flood. So, if we're driving down the road and we see a rainbow and we talk about how beautiful it is beautiful. Maybe we should use an opportunity to say that was given to Noah after the flood. And this is a teaching moment for our children to continue to recognize how important that rainbow is. And as I said, God declared that he would look upon the rainbow, and it would be a reminder to himself, not that he forgets, not that he has any challenges with mental capacity, but he's promising, look, you're going to see the rainbow from below, I'm going to see the rainbow from above, and we know that I am not going to destroy the earth by flood. In fact, these rains and weather cycles and patterns and all of that, they're very important to the health of the earth. So let's not get unjustly terrified when we see storm clouds on the horizon. But again, proper precautions and things when we need to see them. Now, given the fact that sin and wickedness occurred, I think continue to occur every second on the earth, it should bring us a little bit of comfort to know that probably somewhere on this great big globe, there might be a rainbow just about every moment of every day. I mean, there's storm clouds going on like that, and God can look down and say, even though it's all happening, the sin and wickedness is happening, but I promised I would not bring judgment on the earth through a global flood again. And so it should serve as some level of comfort to know we live on a great big globe, and there's probably some kind of weather cycle going on somewhere, and therefore a rainbow could be somewhere, and God is constantly reminding himself of the really kind of the pain and severity of what the global flood once caused on the earth. So, as I said, God doesn't need to be reminded, but we certainly do need to be reminded to make regular assurances of God's promises will never be broken to us. Okay. All right, and I will say, I thought I put it in here, but I don't think I did. The fact that the gay and lesbian community have co-opted the rainbow, we as Christians should be willing to take it back. We should be willing, we don't want anybody to confuse our appreciation of the rainbow in terms of thinking we support LGBTQ if we're not, but we should be recognizing that's a sign that God has given us to promise us that even though we're wicked and sinful, he is long-suffering towards his justice, right? And so isn't it interesting that they've taken a promise and a blessing of God, and as Satan always does, he corrupts it, distorts it, and changes it so that God's blessing becomes a symbol of man's sin when it was supposed to be a symbol of God's forbearance of God's judgment on sin. It's interesting how Satan is so fixated on trying to corrupt everything that God declares as good. All right, into the next section, which is less, more talking about how sin and wickedness and judgment hits on the earth. All right, so chapter 9, verse 18. Now the sons of Noah who went out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And Ham was the father of Canaan. These three were the sons of Noah, and from these the whole earth was populated. And Noah began to be a farmer, and he planted a vineyard. Then he drank of the wine and was drunk, and became uncovered in his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment, and laid it on their shoulders, and went backward, and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned away, and they did not see their father's nakedness. So Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his younger son had done to him. Then he said, "Cursed be Canaan, the servant of servants he shall be to his brethren. And he said, "Blessed be Yahweh, the God of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth, and may he dwell in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant." And Noah lived after the flood 350 years. So all the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. All right, well, that's kind of the tragic side of the story of Noah. He's been pretty darn good, and his sons have been sort of inoculated, nothing bad or good said about them up until this point. Well, now we have to deal with the reality of, human life and conditions and sin and all that. So, but before we get to that, so obviously all three of Noah's sons, and of course their 3 wives, went out of the ark, and it's from them that the whole earth has been populated. So the names Shem, Ham, and Japheth are given because the whole human race would be repopulated through only one of these 3 men. Now, Ham, as declared here, is the younger of the 3 sons. And it says he was the father of Canaan. Now, we're going to see in chapter 10, they all had a number of sons and grandsons and all that went on. But Canaan keeps getting identified in here. This account detail becomes important later in the narrative account in Genesis. We talk about the land of Canaan, and of course, Abraham is going to be given a land grant or promise by God in the land of Canaan. So that's why it's being brought up here. It's also important to the original audience. Remember, Moses wrote this. He's writing to the nation of Israel after they have been exited the nation of Egypt, under all the Pharaoh and all the plagues and all that, and they're headed towards Canaan. So while all the others, of the 3 sons had plenty of offspring, the reason why Moses is inserting his commentary about Ham as the father of Canaan, and of course, Ham is the one who committed the sin against his father Noah, he's giving them help to understand God is still fulfilling his judgment on Ham, on Canaan, while we're headed to go judge them. Remember, they're ultimately going to get called to wipe out every man, woman, and child, and even living thing in the land of Canaan. And so he's God is pointing out through Moses's, description of the events here, we're going to go in and possess the land of somebody that God has cursed or even Noah cursed and is being judged by God, and he's calling us to take possession of their land. They were specifically prophesied and cursed to be our servants, right? So there's a long-standing connection here, both in the development of the narrative in Genesis, and even more so for the very people who very first heard Moses write and deliver this text, because they're on their way to Canaan. And if they hadn't sinned after the 12 spies went in, they all would have gone into Canaan, except for that first generation sinned and their corpses fell in the wilderness. But it's a very important insertion here, while only one grandson, if you will, of Noah is listed here in chapter 9, because it's so important to the whole story and the whole history of the nation of Israel. So Scripture specifically states that the whole earth was populated through these 3 men. I've said that before. I'll just continue to reaffirm that. Noah did not have any other offspring after the flood. It just seems abundantly clear that he didn't have any other offspring. We know that no humans survived the flood who were not aboard the ark. And as I mentioned before, through traced and other things with the Y chromosome, genetically, the human race bottlenecks at these 3 men, and the clock ticks back about 4,400 years. That's what the Y chromosome has been telling us now for the last few years, that the Y chromosome bottlenecks to 3 people, and it bottlenecks 4,400 years ago, and it all makes perfect sense when you apply first the biblical worldview, the authority of Scripture, and use modern science to help fill in the gaps that we don't, that the Scripture's already told us the framework of. And it really answers the questions in a beautiful way. So if you don't want to read the book, Trace, it's not easy to read. I don't know if anybody's read it. It's not an easy read, especially because the way he wrote it, he's got right in the center of the book, he's got all these color pages. And he kind of asks you all through the book to keep flipping back to the center of the book and look at the colored diagrams and charts. And so you're reading and you're flipping forward, and you're reading and you're flipping back, and it's a little bit challenging. It's not super, super technical, but it's a bit of a challenge. But I will tell you that, even on YouTube, you can go watch about 30 hours worth of content where he walks you through all this. He's really right now focused on the Native Americans in the United States. And their genetic heritage and how long they've been here and where they came from and all that. But it's kind of just an amazing, amazing scientific endeavor that really just has greatly exalted the authority and truth of Scripture, because it's telling the story that we could never have known until technology caught up with what the Bible has told us all along. So it's amazing, if you have any interest in that at all. So we have this bottleneck 4,400 years ago through 3 specific genetic lines, and then the explosion of the human population, but is really a recent phenomenon. It took, listen to this, took from this flood event 4,400 years ago, I shouldn't say 44 BC, it should say 4,400 years ago, until approximately 1800 AD, so just a couple of hundred years ago. The total it took from there, from the flood to 200 years ago, to reach 1 billion people on the planet. Now we are over 8 billion people, with projections to get to 9 billion people within the next 25 years. So here's a graph of what that kind of looks like. Now, this comes from a secular sort of site, so you can go back to the 0 point on the far left over there. Doesn't matter if it's 4,400 years ago on our timeline, or 10,000 or 20,000 years ago on their secular timelines. Just notice how flat it was all the way through until 1800, and it popped up in 1800. And then look what's happened all the way through till here. About there is where we're at, and where they're projecting us to be by 2050. Okay. This explosion happened, but notice it. I mean, it was fairly flat, which kind of should indicate to us. Well, we tend to probably think in terms of ancient worlds is not all that different from us, But when you think about 1 million people or more than 1 million people of Israel coming out of Egypt, that was a huge number for the time period, right? Or you think about certain cities having a population of 50,000 or 200,000 people in Nineveh, or whatever the city was. That represents a huge portion of the population of the planet compared to today. We're in Spokane or whatever, and we have 300,000 people in this sort of general area or whatever it may be, and we're just a small little teeny fraction of things. Whereas 300,000 people in ancient worlds for most of the time was, a huge section of the whole total population. Right back in here, you're only talking about 500 million people or so, at best. So it's a recent phenomenon that we have anywhere close to 1 billion people, much less 8 billion people on the planet. Okay. So, but it's still all bottlenecks back there 4,400 years ago, not 4,400 BC. All right. So while Noah's occupation, we'll move on from the population curves. While Noah's occupation prior to being called to build the ark, we don't know what it was. Was it a farmer? Maybe. A lot of people probably were. Was it shipbuilder? We don't know if any ships were being built prior to the ark. But we don't know what his occupation was. But now it says he became a farmer. I had fun tracing down the semantic ranges of that word. I think it really does mean become. But there's in Hebrew, there's various sort of word forms, and all except one of the word forms here, it was all pejorative in the sense of sinful. It was very, very negative, sinful kind of thing. And one is used throughout the Old Testament as became. And I thought, am I onto something here? And I thought, I don't know, I guess not. It's just that word form. But he became a farmer. I'll talk about that in a moment. But it's subsequent to the flood. So it sounds like he wasn't really a farmer until after the flood, at least based on the language that's given there. So he began to be a farmer. So it really says, and linguistically it says, to began to be a man of the ground or a husband of the ground. Not that he married the ground, but a husbandman or somebody who works the ground, okay? in indicating he started to till the ground as any farmer would. While he was now permitted to eat animals for food, it was probably important after the flood that they start getting some agricultural activity going on, getting some things planted. My guess is, doesn't say it specifically in the text, my guess is one of the things he took aboard the ark were a bunch of plant seeds that he would then use later to plant the ground, and so that he could have cultivated crops after the flood. So I think while he took 2 of every kind of animal and he took his family on board, my guess is he also took seeds to plant the farm and the various things that God and he realized he would need after the flood. There's no indication, however, at this point, how much time had passed. Did he jump off the ark and go start tilling the ground, or did he spend some time still living on the provisions that they pulled off the ark, and a couple of years passed, maybe still waiting for the ground to sort of be properly ready to go for farming activity? We don't know. It doesn't tell us. But given the climate changes in climate and the fact that the ice age is believed to have occurred relatively soon after the flood, my guess is being a farmer may have had many challenges for Noah, right? I mean, because if there's this global ice age that's sort of enveloping the planet, obviously, subsequent to the flood, which most creation, if not all creation scientists believe is probably the outcome of this global flood event, farming would be a challenge in an ice age. Right, so probably, again, I wouldn't think that Noah's life was all that easy. Right, he comes off the ark, and he's got nobody, no enemies, and he's got no competition for resources. But he's probably fighting a whole lot of geological upheaval and changes, and probably an ice age. So whatever we kind of envision Noah going, oh, he planted a vineyard, and it's like all life is just so good. My guess is probably a lot of challenges that God ensured he could overcome, but they probably wasn't all sitting around just enjoying life with hardly any people on the planet. It was probably a bit of a challenge just to survive in his day. But in addition to whatever else he farmed and planted, he planted a vineyard. He drank wine, and he got drunk. Now, this is the first mention of any of these terms in Scripture to this point, meaning first mention of being a vineyard, first mention of wine, and the first mention of anybody getting drunk. Okay, there is no prohibition given in Scripture to this point against making or drinking wine. Because it hasn't been mentioned yet. We don't know that God said you can or can't or anything else, right? So we don't know that act alone was sinful. But Noah getting drunk is shown to be a mistake, I believe, is in a moral failure. Both by the fact that he got drunk and by the fact that he then became uncovered in his nakedness, even in his own tent, is clearly pejorative or clearly described as a moral failure on Noah's part post-flood. So because he was drunk and uncovered himself in his tent, this is also that the result of being drunk, which it almost always is also a moral failure that we see. So it's unfortunate for Noah. While he mostly gets positive attention throughout Scripture and in most of the Christian circles, of course, because, hey, we're all here because of his faith and obedience, we do have this one blemish on his resume. So Noah's wife is not mentioned, so it's unclear if she was alive when he got drunk and, collapsed drunken into his tent. Or maybe she normally slept in a different tent, snoring or, whatever else. We don't know. Okay, we just know that Noah got drunk, went into his tent, and he was uncovered in his tent, and which is not being described in any kind of positive light in the Scripture. So Ham, again, the father of Canaan, it says, saw his father's nakedness, which means he saw his exposed genitals. That's really kind of literally what the term is trying to communicate, right? Not just saw his father undressed or, sometimes we talk about like nakedness in the Bible is like they stripped off the outer garment, right? And so they ran away naked. But in some sense, like, well, they were still had their kind of other stuff on. This is, literally trying to express he saw him uncovered from head to toe or in the worst parts of being uncovered. So he must have been, I believe, Ham must have been inside his father's tent, because he then had to go and inform his brothers while they were still outside. So at first I was thinking, well, maybe tents were just sort of a lean-to or something, and he fell asleep in his tent, but his tent really wasn't closed in. But then I'm thinking, well, no, Shem and Japheth had to be told that their father was in his tent uncovered. And so I think it probably had some privacy, but Ham must have gone into the tent in order to observe or in some way, violate his father because of this nakedness that he was in. So Ham tells his brother, therefore I believe bringing shame to Noah, his father, and really on all of Noah's sons. He's telling them the sin or telling them about something that he never should have witnessed, and he's, for whatever reason, he's telling his brothers something that he shouldn't have seen or done. Ham, don't forget, this is not Ham as a small child running into his daddy's tent and oh, I saw daddy naked. He's 100 years old, right? I mean, he was born before the flood, and he probably helped construct the ark for that 100 some odd years of time between Noah being 500 years old and having sons, getting married and building the ark. He's plenty old by this time. Okay. And he also had a wife, we know, because he brought his wife on board the ark with him. So he had really no business being in his father's tent. And so, and we still don't know what he did. We'll talk about some speculations there. Okay. So even though this information is exposed now, Shem and Japheth attempt to do their best to honor and protect their father who's drunk. So these two older sons lay a garment, like a cloak, on their shoulders, and they walk backwards into the tent. They lay the garment back across Noah to cover up his nakedness. And they did so very specifically, and even noted in the text, they did not turn their heads or look at their father's nakedness. They did whatever they could do to not add further shame to their father or to their family because of what Ham had exposed in terms of the information. So Noah, however, it's very clear, Noah is aware of what his son Ham had done to him. Now, you think, well, he woke up and he was covered when he fell asleep drunk and uncovered. This is germinated in all kinds of speculation as to what might have actually occurred. I'll share some of them with you, knowing that we will never know if any of them are true or not true or anything else. Okay. So there's speculations that run wild with regard to anything that may have happened here. Some view the transgression as being that Ham had a sexual encounter with his mother, meaning he entered his father's tent. Now, there's plenty of places, or a number of places in Scripture anyway, where seeing the nakedness of the person's father really meant that they were having a sexual relationship with his wife. Okay, that is a possibility. Doesn't say it, it doesn't not say it. But it's possible that he had an incestuous relationship with his mother, which doesn't seem to make sense in terms of why Noah was drunk and why that happened, unless he's just taking the opportunity of my drunk father won't know that I'm going to go in and probably rape my mother. But, some speculate to that effect. Some believe it was actually Canaan who was the perpetrator, and Canaan was the one who went in and slept with his grandmother because Cain is the one cursed in all of this. Like, he's Ham's responsibility, he's Ham's son, but he did some kind of inappropriate sexual conduct, which is why he, not his father, Ham, was cursed. Speculation. Some hold that Ham or even Canaan engaged in homosexual activity with drunken Noah. Some believe Ham castrated his father, or maybe Canaan as well, as an explanation as to why, and this might be used as an explanation why Noah, after 350 years, probably still being a fairly virile man, had no more sons, right? So we don't know. All of these are kind of speculations that people wildly try to guess as to what may have happened, why Noah was so violated, and why Ham and Canaan were so strongly cursed subsequent to the action. Okay. But regardless of any of these being true or not true, Ham or Canaan, in terms of what Ham or Canaan did, it's clear that Noah was aware of some form of violation or some moral protocol that had been violated that he is quick and decisive in enacting a punishment, which is a curse on Canaan. Okay. So Noah cursed Canaan. Again, recognize this, not Ham. Now, again, why is that important in the story? Just like we talked about, it's the land of Canaan, Ham's son, that God has promised to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and all of their descendants. Okay. And he declared that Canaan's descendants would be servants to his brothers. This is like a perpetual, lifelong curse that everyone who's a descendant of Canaan will serve the other two brothers. Okay, so this is, and that's important because it's not just Ham. We're going to look at, if we get there tonight, we're going to look at all the descendants of Ham, which there's a whole bunch of them listed in chapter 10 of Genesis. But it wasn't all of them, as some people try to claim. It was only Canaan. Because I'll tell you now, and maybe tell you in chapter 10 if it's tonight or next week, people with racism in their minds and hearts have recognized that like Ham is the father of like the Ethiopians and others in the African regions, and so they believe that they were perfectly justified in enslaving people of dark skin color because of the curse of Ham. Well, there's not a curse of Ham, there's a curse of Canaan. And it's very specific and very limited, and we don't believe that Canaan was nearly as dark-skinned as the people in Africa, okay, the other descendants of Ham in Africa. So it's just a bunch of twisting and distorting the truth of Scripture to fit man's perverted and sinful agenda in some of those things. So then Noah blessed his other two sons. So he doesn't say anything about Ham, he curses Canaan, but then he blesses or elevates Shem and Japheth. Okay. So Shem is the principal recipient of Noah's blessing. He's the first one. He's the middle son, but he's the first one mentioned, and he's the one who receives the principal blessing, as you will see here. Yahweh, he says, would be a blessing to Shem, which literally true, right? Shemites, and Israelites and all that. God was a principal blessing to this middle son of Noah. And he would make Canaan his servant. Okay, well, in being servant, he could also defeat them in battle and wipe them off the face of the earth if God so chose because of the wickedness of their sinful conduct. But additionally, Noah prayed that God would enlarge Japheth, not just Shem, but Japheth. But you see the difference here in elevation because Japheth would be blessed by dwelling in Shem's tents. Like Shem is the one really blessed. And if Japheth will dwell under the protection and authority of the Shemites, then they also receive an additional special blessing, which really goes along with what God promises Abraham in chapter 12. Those who bless you I will bless, and those who curse you I will curse. And so Japhethites coming under the authority or the tents of Shem, or really Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, would simply be blessed just like Abraham was, or Shem was. But Ham and the rest of his descendants, Ham himself and the rest of his descendants, other than Canaan, were neither blessed nor cursed. They're just neutral at that stage. Okay, so again, that flies in the face of some, twisting of Scripture as people have done, as I just mentioned. All right, and then finally, Noah lived 350 years after the flood. At flood's beginning, it's really 349 years after he got off the ark, if we're doing our mathematical stuff properly here. So he lived a total of 950 years. That makes him the third longest living person in Scripture. Obviously, Methuselah is number one, and I think it's Yared was number two, both living a little bit longer than Noah. Years-wise, yeah. Yeah, years-wise, not longer in terms of chronology in Earth's history. So there is no mention of Noah's burial or a period of mourning for his death by his family, which is kind of typical for a patriarch, but they probably did. It's just interesting to me they didn't note that his sons didn't mourn his death or do any kind of rituals associated with his death, like it happened with Abraham, like happened with Isaac, like happened with Jacob and Joseph and all of that. Okay, but anyway, he lived a nice long life, third longest living man in all of human history, as recorded in Scripture. All right, Let's see. I didn't put chapter 10's verses in here. Well, let's see. We have enough time. Let's go. Let me go ahead and read it. It's actually fairly, well, quick. I don't know if it's short, but it's quick to read through. I don't have it on the screen for you. We're just going to read through this enough to get the sense that all of humankind descends from these three men, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Okay. So let me read Genesis chapter 10. And I will butcher as many names as I possibly can. Huh? Yeah. Let's do whatever I can here. Now, this is the genealogy. Remember, this is the Toledoth. This is that statement of we're kind of transitioning into a new section here. Now, this is the genealogy of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And the sons were born to them after the flood. The sons of Japheth were Gomer, Magog, Madai, Uvan, Tubal, Meshach, and Tiras. The sons of Gomer was Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Torgama. The sons of Yavin were Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, Dodanim. From these, the coastland peoples of the Gentiles were separated into their lands, everyone according to his language, according to their families, into their nations, which we won't know about until we get to the Tower of Babel in the next chapter. We'll talk about that next week. This is one of those situations, again, where he tells you what he's going to tell you before he tells you what he's going to tell you. Okay, all right. Verse 6, then the sons of Ham were Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. The sons of Cush were Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Rama, Sabteka, and the sons of Rama were Sheba and Dedan. Cush begot Nimrod. Nimrod, we'll hear about him next chapter. And he began to be a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore, it is said, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. Again, we'll talk about, I didn't put him in the notes tonight. We'll talk about him next week, okay, because it's so important to Babel. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, Calneh, in the land of Shinar. Okay. And from that land he went to Assyria and built Nineveh, Rehoboth, Calah. And Resen, between Nineveh and Calah, that is the principal city. Mizraim begot Ludum, Anamim, Lahabim, and Naphtuhimim. Yeah, maybe not even close. All right. Pathruism and Casluhim, from whom the Philistines, and Caphtorim. Canaan begot Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth, the Jebusite, the Amorite, and the Girgashite, the Hivite, the Arkite, and the Sinite, the Arvadite, and the Zemarite, and the Hamathite. Afterward, the families of the Canaanites were dispersed. And the border of the Canaanites was from Sidon as far as you go to Gerar, as far as Gaza, and then you will go towards Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim as far as Lasha, which, by the way, Gaza is not the same Gaza, not the same location as we're talking about in the news today. All right. These were the sons of Ham according to their families, according to their languages, in their lands and in their nations. And the children were born also to Shem, the father of all the children of Eber, which I think we also will talk about being Hebrew, okay? The brother of Japheth, the elder. The sons of Shem were Elam, Asher, Arphaxad, Lud, Aram. And the sons of Aram were Uz, Hul, Gether, and Mash. Arphaxad begot Selah, and Salah, and Eber. To Eber were born the two sons. The name of the one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Yoktan. Yoktan begot Almadad, Sephleth, Hazarmaveth, maybe, Yara, Hadoram, Uzal, Diklah, Obal, Abimaal, Sheba, Ophir, Havilah, and Yobad. All of these were the sons of Yoktan. And their dwelling place was from Mesha as far as you go towards Sephar, the mountain of the east. And these were the sons of Shem according to their families, according to their languages, in all their lands according to their nations. These were the families of the sons of Noah according to their generations in their nations, and from these nations were divided on the earth after the flood. So again, another statement that only all the populations of the world are through these three sons of Noah. So again, we could talk about this forever, and if you have a deep interest in the genealogical or the ethnical history of humankind, there's plenty of books and resources out there that will help you to try to lay that out. Let me just give you the highlights without trying to completely derail or bore everybody to death here. But in a sense, we should take some comfort to know we came from somewhere within these family groups. We're all represented here in some capacity. You might recognize yourself in part of what we recognize, but if you don't, well, we're still part of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Okay, so the exact number, with all those names that I read, sometimes you might notice it's a little hard. Sometimes it might be a place, not a person, that he was listed there. And sometimes it's a person. And so scholars have a little bit of debate. There seems to be, most of them lean towards either 68, 69, 70, or 71 actual descendants of Noah. Let's nominally say it was 70. Okay. Which nominally 70 works out really interestingly because 70 of Jacob's family went to Egypt, right? And so it's kind of 70 Israelites against 70 nations of the world. It seems to be this balance that is kind of described as we're talking about, the nation of Israel coming out of Egypt and going to possess the land of Canaan. It's 70 family members against 70 nations that their forefathers had spawned, if you will. Okay, so let's just walk down Japheth. A lot of people think they're Japhethites, and they're probably right, but the recent studies that Dr. Jensen did is, I think, declassifying a number of people who thought they were Japhethites into Shemites, by the way. But anyway, so you have to study that if you haven't already, if you like. Don't have to. So Gomer is the Sumerians with their settlements along the Nunab and the Rhine, okay? And from there we get Ashkenaz, which is Germany. So if you have German descent, you're probably a Japhethite, at least in part. Riphath is predominantly dealing with Europe. Togarmah is the Armenians in Turkey. Okay? All these people should be able to look back at Genesis and say, Genesis is real history. Look, my family came from what was listed from Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So I said, this should give us incredible confidence and trust in the authority of the whole of the early chapters of Genesis, because we can literally trace our ancestry back to these people in most cases, or in all cases, but whether we know how to do that or not is another question. Magog is the Scythians, which has later been identified as Russia. So people from Russia have their connection to the Japhethites. Madai is the Medes and the Kurds. You probably heard about them in the Iraq War and all that happened. Tubal is associated with Anatolia, Turkey, modern-day Turkey, as well as Meshach is also associated with the same. Yavin, Ionia, and Greece. So we have Greek in our history. We're also Japhethites, more than likely. Elisha, Tarshish, which is Britain. So we have British history in our ancestry. Tarshish comes from Japheth, which is why I said a lot of people tend to think they're Japhethites because of all that European, British kind of history. Tiras, Dodanim, and Tiras, which is the Aegean and Etruscans. And so that gives a lot of context for what most of us think of ourselves of we're sort of white Europeans or whatever, if that's our heritage, as probably a lot of us in this room are. We seem to be Japhethites, at least according to traditional recordings of these things. Y chromosomes may tell a different story, as I said. All right, Ham is the biggest section. Ham has got the most descendants listed out of anybody. And so we'll talk about them. Again, remember, only Canaan was the one cursed, not the rest. So Cush is listed. He's from, we would associate Cush with Arabia and Ethiopia. We got Seba, Havilah, which is in the northern portion of Arabia. Sabbath, Ramah, Sheba and Dedan were there, which is again in northern Arabia. Sabtaka is also listed. Nimrod is clearly associated with Shinar, which we also recognize as the land of Ur of the Chaldeans and all of that. Looks like I spelled it wrong, but anyway, so we recognize that Abraham came from Ur of the Chaldeans, although he wasn't from a Hamite, but that's the region he was living in when he got called out. And so that was established, people groups and cities like Babel and Erech and Akkad, Calneh, Assyria, and Nineveh. Mizraim, so everybody from Egypt originally. Now there's been lots of, dynasty changes in Egypt, and people who live in Egypt and probably weren't original Egyptians as far as like today. But Mizraim was Egypt. Mizraim literally means dual, or the upper and lower Egypt, who had two different capitals, you might recall, Memphis and Thebes. Okay, they talk about northern Egypt and southern Egypt. Here's the tricky part, if I understand it correctly. I think I do. Remember that the Nile River flows north, not south, and so when they talk about Upper Egypt, they're talking about south, and when they're talking about Lower Egypt, they're talking about north, because the river flows in a different direction than every other river. And so anyway, but you got the two capitals, you got Memphis and Thebes for the two cities, or the dual nation there. Ludum and Ananim, Lahabim, Naphtuhim, Pathrazim, I can't say any of these. The Philistines came out from Ham, Put or Foot, depending on your translation there. Canaan, obviously Sodom and Gomorrah associated with that. While they're not around anymore, we certainly recognize the names. And all of these different names that are associated with them, I don't have any direct links to sort of modern cultures, so I won't even try to pronounce those names this time around. Then we get to the middle son, the last grouping here, Shem, which is obviously deeply associated with the nation of Israel, Shemites, and so I think it's somewhat speculation, but we think we get the term anti-Semitic from Shem, anti-Shem, anti-Shemitic, okay, and then we also have Eber, which we believe is Hebrew, where we get that term Hebrew from, possibly. It's, again, not certain, but that's where a lot of people lean. So you got Elam and Arphaxad and Salah, who begot Eber, who we think is an original definition of Hebrew. Peleg and Yoktam, and it says that in the days of Peleg, the earth was divided. Doesn't mean continental drift, we don't think. We think that means that's the days when the Tower of Babel event took place. Okay, and then you see all these other names, again, associated with Shemites at that time, and all the way down. So, just to close out for tonight, the earth was divided in the days of Peleg, which, again, I think we're going to find next week when we talk about in detail Babel and Nimrod and all of those kind of events. I didn't want to try and cloud the issues tonight. We'll talk about chapter 11, which is a restatement of some of the events that we've just looked at here, but with the specific event of Babel, God confusing the languages and causing a dispersion of all ethnic groups on the planet. We'll talk about that next week and show a map and things like that. But again, I want to just reiterate, just because Scripture is so wants to make sure we're abundantly clear on this task, or on this topic or fact. It was from Noah's sons and all their offsprings that the nations of the earth were divided and were scattered across the earth because of the confusion of languages. Any statement or claim that there's anybody else who we would descend from other than Shem, Ham, and Japheth about 4,400 years ago is not a biblical view, and it's really not supported by scientific evidence. But Scripture makes it abundantly clear, from 1,600 years ago and beyond, that all the earth is populated by these three men, and again, all scientific conclusions, valid scientific conclusions that we can draw, affirms the authority and the validity of the biblical text. So we'll talk Babel and even Abraham next week. So, yep, thanks. See you then. Yeah. Bonus points for every correct pronunciation. Yeah. However I did, so. Thanks.